Cain and Abel, a tragic tale of jealousy, sin, and divine justice. Long ago, when the world was still in its infancy, the earth was filled with both the beauty of creation and the weight of hardship. The first human beings, Adam and Eve, had once lived in perfect harmony with nature and their Creator, residing in the blissful paradise of the Garden of Eden. In Eden, they had known only peace, joy, and provision. Every need they had was met. The fruits of the trees provided them food, the rivers gave them water, and there was no toil or suffering in their lives. God Himself walked with them in the cool of the evening. It was a world untouched by sin, a world where life flourished without the curse of death. But this perfect world did not last. Temptation came in the form of a serpent who whispered lies to Eve, convincing her that eating from the one forbidden tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, would make her like God. Though God had warned them not to eat from this tree, Eve, tempted by the desire for wisdom and power, took the fruit and ate. Adam, standing beside her, also ate. In that single moment of disobedience, everything changed. Their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. Shame, guilt, and fear entered their hearts for the first time. Sin had entered the world, and with it came death. For their disobedience, God cast them out of Eden. No longer would they live in the ease and abundance of paradise. Instead, they were sent into the world, where Adam would have to toil and struggle to bring forth food from the ground, and Eve would experience pain in childbirth. The earth itself was cursed because of their sin. Thorns and thistles grew where there had once been only lush gardens, and their relationship with God, once so close and intimate, was now fractured. Even so, life continued. Outside the garden, Adam and Eve began their new existence, and in time they had children. Their firstborn son was Cain, and after him, they had another son, Abel. The birth of their sons brought both joy and hope to Adam and Eve. Despite their fall from grace, they knew that life went on and that God had promised them descendants. Cain and Abel were the first children born into this new world, a world no longer marked by perfection, but by labor, struggle, and hardship. As the two brothers grew, they began to learn the ways of the world from their parents. Adam taught them how to work the land, to till the soil, to plant seeds, and to gather the harvest. Eve taught them about the importance of family, nurturing them with love despite the difficulties they faced. Both Adam and Eve instilled in their sons the knowledge of God, reminding them of their dependence on the Creator who had given them life. Though they were no longer in Eden, God's presence was still a part of their lives, and they knew that worship and sacrifice were essential to maintaining their relationship with Him. In time, Cain and Abel grew into men, each choosing a different path in life. Cain, being the firstborn, took on the responsibility of working the land. He became a farmer, spending his days under the hot sun, tilling the earth, planting seeds, and harvesting crops. Cain was a man of hard labor. The soil he worked was stubborn, often refusing to yield its fruits easily. But Cain was determined. He saw himself as the provider, the one who would ensure that the family had enough food to survive. His identity became wrapped up in his work, and he took great pride in the produce he brought forth from the earth. Every grain, every stalk of wheat, and every piece of fruit was a testament to his efforts. To Cain, his work was his legacy. Abel, on the other hand, chose a different path. He became a shepherd tending to flocks of sheep. His life was spent in the rolling hills and fields, where he led his sheep to green pastures and fresh waters. Unlike the land, which resisted Cain's efforts, Abel's sheep responded to his gentle care. He was a man of quiet patience, guiding his flock with kindness and understanding. His relationship with his animals was almost symbiotic. They depended on him for protection and sustenance, and in return, they provided wool, milk, and meat. Abel's life was peaceful compared to Cain's. He spent his days in the open air, away from the toil of the fields, and his heart was at ease. Despite their different vocations, both brothers understood that their blessings, whether crops or livestock, came from God. It was customary at the time to offer sacrifices to God as a sign of gratitude and reverence. This was not just a ritual, but an act of worship, a way of acknowledging God's sovereignty and expressing dependence on His provision. Cain and Abel both decided to bring offerings to God, but the nature of their offerings reflected their individual lives. Cain, being a farmer, gathered the fruits of the land. He selected grains, fruits, and vegetables from his harvest and brought them to the altar. To Cain, these crops represented the sweat of his brow, the hard work he had poured into the soil. He believed that by offering the fruits of his labor, he was honoring God. However, deep within his heart, there was a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. His offering was more about showcasing his work than it was about humbly submitting to God. Abel, being a shepherd, chose to offer something different. From his flock, he selected the firstborn lambs, the fattest, healthiest, and most unblemished of his sheep. These lambs were the pride of his flock, a representation of the best he had to offer. Abel's offering was one of deep reverence and sincerity. He knew that the firstborn of the flock was the most valuable, and by giving it to God, he was showing that nothing was more important to him than honoring his Creator. Abel's heart was pure, and his sacrifice reflected a genuine desire to please God, not to seek personal glory. When the time came for their sacrifices, both brothers presented their offerings to God. Cain's altar was piled high with the fruits of the earth, while Abel's was adorned with the finest lambs from his flock. As the smoke from the sacrifices rose to the heavens, God looked down upon the offerings. He saw Abel's offering and was pleased. The lambs offered with humility and devotion were accepted with favor. Abel's heart was aligned with God's will, and his sacrifice was a true act of worship. However, when God looked at Cain's offering, he did not accept it with the same favor. It was not the crops themselves that displeased God, but rather the attitude with which they were offered. Cain's heart was not in the right place. His offering was given out of obligation, not love. There was no true humility or devotion in Cain's act of worship. He had brought the fruits of his labor, but his sacrifice lacked the sincerity that God desired. God, who sees into the hearts of men, knew that Cain's pride had clouded his ability to offer a genuine gift. When Cain realized that God had accepted Abel's offering, but not his own, he was filled with anger and jealousy. His pride had been wounded, and rather than reflecting on his own heart and seeking to understand why his offering had been rejected, Cain turned his frustration toward his brother. Jealousy is a powerful force, and in Cain, it began to take root. He could not bear the thought that his younger brother had been favored over him. Every time he saw Abel, his envy grew stronger. Abel had done nothing to provoke this anger, yet Cain's heart became consumed with bitterness. God, in his mercy, saw the growing darkness in Cain's heart and sought to warn him. He spoke to Cain, saying, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." These words were a direct warning to Cain. God knew that sin was lurking, ready to devour him if he did not take control of his emotions. Sin, like a wild beast, was waiting at the door of Cain's heart, ready to pounce and consume him if he gave in to his jealousy. But God also gave Cain a choice, the opportunity to resist. He could choose to humble himself, to do what was right, and to be accepted. The path to reconciliation was open to him, but it required self-reflection and humility. Cain had the power to master his emotions, but only if he was willing to submit to God's will. Unfortunately, Cain did not heed God's warning. His heart had already been hardened by pride and jealousy, and instead of choosing the path of humility, he allowed his anger to grow. Day after day, he brooded over the perceived injustice. Why had God accepted Abel's offering and not his? Why was his younger brother favored while he, the elder, was overlooked? These thoughts consumed him, and his jealousy turned to hatred. One day, Cain approached Abel and suggested they go out into the fields together. Abel, trusting, attacked Abel. In a fit of fury, Cain struck his brother down. Abel, defenseless and unsuspecting, fell to the ground, his life slipping away as his blood soaked into the earth. Cain stood over Abel's lifeless body, his hands trembling with the weight of what he had done. The fields, once a place of labor and growth, had become the site of the first murder in human history. Abel, the gentle shepherd, the man of peace, had been slain by his own brother. Cain's jealousy had led him down a dark and irreversible path. The blood of Abel, innocent and unjustly spilled, cried out from the ground for justice. As the sun set over the horizon, Cain's guilt began to settle in. He had taken the life of his brother, the very one with whom he had grown up, shared meals and played as children. What had he done? The silence of the fields was deafening, and the weight of his sin was unbearable. Later, God came to Cain and asked him a simple but piercing question. "Where is your brother Abel?" God's question was not one of ignorance, for he already knew what had happened. It was a question designed to confront Cain with the reality of his actions, to force him to acknowledge his sin. But Cain, consumed by guilt and fear, attempted to lie to God. "I don't know," he replied, trying to evade responsibility. Then, with a tone of indifference, he added, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain's response was callous, revealing just how far his heart had turned from both God and his own family. His question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" was a denial of the basic human responsibility to care for one another. Cain had failed in his duty, not only as a brother, but as a man created in the image of God, meant to live in community and harmony with others. But God, who knows all things, would not be deceived. His voice thundered with judgment. "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." At that moment, the full weight of Cain's actions fell upon him. He had not only lost his brother, but he had also lost his place in the world. The very ground that Cain had worked so hard to cultivate was now cursed against him. No matter how much he toiled, the earth would resist him, refusing to yield its crops. He would no longer have the stability of a home or a livelihood. Instead, he would be condemned to wander the earth, a fugitive, never finding rest or peace. Terrified of his fate, Cain cried out to God, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Even in this moment of judgment, God showed mercy. Though Cain had committed a grievous sin, God did not abandon him completely. "Not so," God replied. "Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." And so God placed a mark on Cain, a sign of protection, ensuring that no one would kill him in vengeance. This mark was not a blessing, but a symbol of both punishment and grace. Cain would live with the consequence of his actions, but God's hand of protection would remain upon him. And so Cain left the presence of the Lord and went to live in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There, far from his family and the land he had once worked, Cain became a restless wanderer. He built a city, had children, and lived out his days, but the mark on him was a constant reminder of the sin he had committed and the brother he had lost. Lessons from the story of Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel is not just a tale of 2 brothers. It is a profound reflection on human nature, sin, and the consequences of turning away from God's will. Cain's jealousy, pride, and unchecked anger led him to commit the first murder, and his story serves as a warning to all who allow negative emotions to fester. Jealousy can distort our view of the world, making us believe that others' success is an affront to our own. Pride can prevent us from seeking forgiveness or admitting our faults, leading us down a path of destruction. God's warning to Cain that sin is crouching at your door and that we must rule over it is a reminder that we all face temptation. Sin is always present, ready to take hold of us if we let it. But we also have the power to resist, to choose the path of humility, repentance, and self-control. The story of Cain and Abel teaches us that our choices have consequences, not only for ourselves but for those around us.